I'm gonna get going here. So first, I'd like to hear some of you all. Tell me what you thought about the Last Dance and all of that, and what we saw with MJ. Were there some things that we learned new? Were there some things that we already knew? Were there some things that we knew a little bit about that were expanded on? So I have my thoughts for sure. Certainly like to share some of those with you all. I know for me, one of the big things that stood out was, again, I like the flashback because when we're going back from a basketball perspective, we saw a lot of the things where he was relying on his athleticism as a player initially, and then he continued to morph into, as his athleticism started to decrease, he actually became a better player, and he was using those basics as a force multiplier to do that spectacular. That's something I talk about a lot, and he was doing that as a player. It was good to see that. But a lot of the things that stood out to me was from a branding perspective. When you started looking at how impactful and powerful his brand is and the reach of that brand. And that's part of the reason why we have this today, because of that reach. And, the last time he played, at least when he was in Chicago, that's 20 years ago. And that reach that he has as a player is 22 years ago, to be exact. And, that reach is so impactful. It's so powerful. It influenced so many players. It influenced LeBron James. And so it's that. And when you started looking at it from a branding perspective, I know for me, my experience, not only being a player, but working at Nike in basketball, I started to really understand it's not necessarily about having or someone being the best player. And it's not necessarily about them being the most popular player. It's actually about having that embodied in one entity. And that's the sweet spot. And that's where it resonates with fans. And if you're a brand, that's where it really resonates at retail. So Michael was not only the best player in the world, but while he was the best player in the world, he was also everyone's favorite player. And that meant that cash register was cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. And that's what all the brands are chasing to this day. And not only does that impact branding when you start looking at players and when you start looking at the choices that they make off the floor, the fact that they're trying to not only be everyone's favorite, the best player in the world, they're also trying to be everyone's favorite. The other thing that does as well is it influences where that player wants to play. As part of the reason why there's such a drive to try to get to LA for a lot of players, or if in the case of LeBron James, the second time you go back to Cleveland, you want to make everybody emotional about the fact that you're going home, and you want that to resonate with them so you can then leverage that at retail. And Michael was the master of that. That was the first time that we really saw someone really being conscious of making people emotional about the things that they do on the floor. And he leveraged that. Nike leveraged that. And also, too, from a branding perspective as well, when you look at the league, I know a lot of people were looking at Magic and Bird and those players, and they laid the groundwork for Michael to open that door and walk through it. But one of the things from a league perspective, and I know a lot of people were upset and people criticized the Trailblazers for not taking Michael Jordan. But what that did for the league to have that type of talent in Michael in Chicago, again, that was part of leveraging his ability to connect with people through his play off the floor, and taking that ability and putting it in the third biggest media market in the United States. And they leveraged that. So now with Michael in Chicago, you had all of the major markets in the United States covered. And so that brought the NBA into pop culture, and it's become the phenomenon that we see now. So you had New York covered with Patrick Ewing. You had Philadelphia covered with Dr. J. You had Boston covered with Larry Bird. At that time, Detroit was a major market. Isaiah Thomas. And you had, obviously in LA, you had Magic. And now in Chicago, you have Michael. And those are the pillars that have made the NBA so popular today. And it's made it sort of transcend sports. And these players are now pop culture icons. So having Michael in Chicago was so much more impactful for all of the league. Of course, the Blazers, with hindsight, of course, they would have wanted it to be a situation where they drafted Michael Jordan. And, one of the things I want to touch on, too, Sam Bowie was not a bust. When someone's body gives out on them or betrays them, it's hard to call them a bust. So he had foot problems. So I'm sure the Blazers, of course, looking at the impact of a Michael Jordan, wish that they would have drafted him. But when you look at the impact having Jordan playing in Chicago meant for all the teams in the NBA, and again, we had some expansion in the Jordan era as well. Miami, Minnesota, Orlando, Minnesota, Miami, Orlando, all joined the league with Michael Jordan in it, Charlotte. So with that being said, his impact, much like Wayne Gretzky in hockey, where you saw this westward expansion, because Wayne Gretzky played in LA, it's the same thing with Michael Jordan. So having him in Chicago meant so much for the league. Didi, appreciate you coming in on Facebook. Yeah, Pippen's salary. I want to say something about that. A lot of people, it's very surprising seeing those numbers and how long that contract is. And, it's good that you mentioned that, because one of the things that we hear a lot when we start talking about player salaries is we as quote unquote mere mortals always talk about player X is making X amount of dollars and I would play for half of that salary. Well, it's hard to talk about those players and their salaries and make it relative to us. And so when we always say that players should always take less and they should play for the love, and I would take, half of that and play. Well, what actually happens is when you dig a little deeper and you peel that onion, what happens is when you are a great player or when you are the best player in your craft, the best player in the league, and you take less, what it does is it forces everybody else to take less. So Michael, while this was going on with Pippen, had signed an 8-year deal worth $25 million. So he's making about $3.5 million a year, somewhere around there. So Michael was severely underpaid. And the precedent that it set was if Michael for the Bulls organization is nobody can be paid more than Michael because he was such a transcendent talent. And so everybody else had to be under that. So in addition to Scottie Pippen feeling like I had to take this salary to take care of my family, the other thing is when the greatest player or the best player, the most important player, also takes less, it forces everybody on the team to fall in line and take less and sacrifice in that manner. So it's Michael understood that at the end of his career, at the end of his run with the Bulls, which is why he was signing those 1-year, $30 million deals, because he was so underpaid during his time with the Bulls. He understood that, and it was his responsibility to the rest of the players, not only on his team, but in the league. If when his ship is in the water, it makes the level rise for everybody. And so when you are a great player, you have a responsibility to the other players to make sure from a salary and a contractual standpoint that you're continuing to push the envelope and make sure that all of the players get the share in the pot. So shout out on that one, Didi. I appreciate you pointing that out. And the other thing, too, from that business standpoint that I'd like to touch on with Scottie is just how similar he is to a certain extent to Dennis Rodman. And, these were two players that both played at that NAIA level and they played on the NAIA level, and they both also while they were in the college age, which is really atypical, they had extraordinary growth spurts. And with them coming from that NAIA level and not having that exposure to major college basketball, which sort of um, um, introduces you to the business of basketball, they both had this kind of uniting strand that was, we're just going to play basketball and not necessarily concentrate so much on the business aspect of basketball. So when they both had that I don't know, experience with the business aspect of basketball. So Dennis, his came a little bit quicker because in the early 90s, when the Pistons were going late 80s, early 90s, going back to back in their championship years, Dennis Rodman, that became his family, that Bad Boys group. And when they started to dismantle that Bad Boys group, Rick Mahorn was drafted by Minnesota in the expansion draft, etc. When they started to dismantle that group, that had a major impact on Dennis Rodman. That was the first time he was really forced to confront the business aspect of basketball. And the same with Scotty when, there were times where Jerry Krause, the GM, was sort of alluding to trading Scotty. And Scotty, for the first time, is looking at, we've accomplished all of these things as a team. And now they're looking at potentially having me, moving me to another spot. So two players who came into the business the same way, and they came into it from a basketball standpoint only, and not necessarily looking from a business standpoint and understanding that business aspect of it. And it confronted them and it sort of hit them in the face really early. And so they have those things. And it's funny how, as much as they were adversaries when they were Chicago and the Bad Boys respectively, how when they actually got together in Chicago, they had much more in common than what meets the eye. And so, yeah, Scotty, it also speaks to, and I don't want to romanticize our era, but it speaks to the love of the game, because he was literally competing. It's the love of the game that was really carrying him. And that commitment to his teammates was really carrying him. And so when you're watching, one of the things with Michael, when you're watching, I know I've seen some comments where people were saying Michael wasn't as supportive to Scotty as he should have been. And, maybe Michael was in a different space because of the revenue that was generated from endorsements. But still, to bring it current for Cowboy fans, they'll say the same thing about Dak Prescott. Well, he should take less because he has endorsements. Well, not necessarily, because it's his play on the field that's getting the endorsements. So you want to be paid what you're worth as the salary cap and all of those things continue to move up. And your representation certainly has to have that foresight to make sure that you're not signing bad deals. It's part of the reason why when LeBron was in Cleveland, when he and Wade and they signed short-term deals to have more control over their destiny. And that ultimately led to them teaming up in Miami. Cordell, appreciate you. LeRon, been everywhere. Appreciate you, family, for joining. Yes, sir. Hey, Carol. LT, no question. The players need to fight for every cent that they have, because this is certainly a business. And we need, as players, we need to understand that this is a business well before we are actually in the midst of being a professional. If you, the first time you're really learning about the business, or the first time you're learning how to cut a steak when you're going to a fancy restaurant, is probably too late. So you have to learn that etiquette and business etiquette as well. From a team standpoint, you have to learn that before you get to the table. So it's incumbent upon the representation, it's incumbent upon your support group to make sure that they give you all the lessons that you need, so you approach it as such. And, I'll take something about college basketball on the Division I level. It's about 355 Division I schools. And the transfer list is almost 800 names every year. And part of that is because people are approaching their college choice with emotion and not looking at it as a business decision. Because especially when you're on that level, that is a business decision. And so you have to approach it as such. And the people around you have to prepare you for that. So that's also whether it's how you conduct yourself in the media, what you say, what brands you associate yourself with, what people you associate yourself with. You have to have an idea of that before you even enter the league. And that's been one of the great things that Mike brought. People were so much more cognizant about their brands, and players are so much more cognizant about their brands now before they get into the league. And you have to have that and understand that this is a business. I mean, prime example in football now, you're seeing this with Tom Brady now in Tampa Bay. I'm sure with how he was approaching this, I'm sure with him being 20 years in New England, all of the accomplishments that he was able to attain and reach there, I'm sure that there was some sentimental value to being there, and all of the things that he did and the organization showed him that this is a business. So you have to be prepared for this and know that this is about more than the love of the game. It's about making sure that you maximize your brand as well to ultimately create generational wealth for your family. That's what this is all about. That's exactly what this is all about. And then even when you're not a professional, what it's about is a way that you can actually create generational wealth for your family as well, is actually using your talent and leveraging that and have that pay for your academics from a higher education standpoint. So that's another way that you are able to be able to create that type of generational wealth or give your family a financial break as well. So you have to make sure that you are looking at this as a platform and a business to really leverage it for your best interest, because everybody else is doing it for their best interest. So yeah, appreciate you, Cordell. I'm trying to break it down, my man. Vanessa, thank you for watching. No, LT, no question. No permanent friends or enemies. It's business. There's no question about that. No doubt. And the quicker you figure that out, the better you can be probably as a player as well. And especially in this era, because one of the things that MJ had in his favor, and he was kind of worried about that as this is coming out, he was worried about being seen as a bad guy. So one of the things that he has in his favor, and I know a lot of people like to say if they're team LeBron or team MJ, and I'm personally, and I don't want to sound like I'm sitting on the fence, but I appreciate greatness, and I don't try to take these two great figures and pit them against each other. It's all about appreciating the greatness while you're having the opportunity to witness that. And I believe, so that's what I believe. And one of the things, again, when you look at MJ, just when Dean Smith actually told MJ after his junior year, you have to leave, that's where he was sort of getting that experience with, okay, this is really a business and I have to start conducting this as a business. And, you know, to make it relevant to some of the things that we're talking about now, and we had a deal right now in the NBA G League where now players are now able to go to the G League and they're able to go to the G League now and they're able to get paid. And that's being able to leverage your platform because you have a short amount of time to be a professional. So that's being able to leverage your platform, and everyone else around you is conducting this as a business, and you are expected to play for the love of the game. Well, that's now forcing the NCAA, if they want to continue their business, they have to take a strong look at their model now, because again, one of the things that was relevant to today when you start talking about the NCAA and amateurs being able to leverage their platform to make money while they're amateurs. You know, Michael Jordan's writing a letter asking for his mom to send stamps, and can he get $20? And this is Michael Jordan here. This is the best player in America asking for $20. So it speaks to a lot about the revenue that, and again, when he played in the national championship game as a freshman, at that time, it was the most watched national championship game in the history of college basketball. So you can only imagine the revenue that was made. And here you are, you made the game winning shot. And at that point, that's when and he said it, I went from Mike Jordan to Michael Jordan, the brand. That's when he became a brand, and he wasn't able to leverage it. So that says a lot about, and especially when you're in a country where he was old enough where he could have gone to the military and given his life, but he couldn't leverage his platform to make money. So again, with that being said, you have to know that this is a business. And going back to a point that I was saying about MJ being worried about his image and talking about LeBron and MJ, one of the things that I'll say is Michael Jordan had the advantage of competing when there was no social media. So it was easier. Now, he had to have transcendent talent, which he did, but it was easier to craft the image that you wanted to see of the player because there was no social media. There was no HD televisions. There were so many mics around the floor where you can pick up everything that a player is saying. So the image that the corporate partners wanted, and that's the NBA, that's Gatorade, that's Nike, that's Chevrolet, that's McDonald's, and the list goes on and on. The image that they wanted to project about Michael was easily projected and was easily protected. And it made him very conscious about the things that he said and how he conducted himself when he went out in public. And again, part of that was him having that training coming into the NBA and being branded as Air Jordan, understanding the business aspect of it immediately, which is different than, say, a Scottie Pippen or a Dennis Rodman. And, you know, again, that now LeBron has to be very much guarded and protected about what he says and what he does, because now the assumption is when you are not on social media, and this is a quote unquote necessary evil when you live in this world. The assumption is when you don't have a social media presence, now the assumption is that you have something to hide. And so LeBron lives in a totally different world than MJ did in that regard. And that's one of the advantages that Michael had. So a lot of the things that he said to teammates, to the opposition, they weren't picked up, and you didn't really see all of those things or really get a good grasp of exactly what he was saying. Proud History, I appreciate you checking in. I got to make an order. You know, and then also too, like one of the things I like to talk about with Pippen, I know that was a really thing that a lot of people were surprised by. You know, his skills and what he did. It's interesting when you are playing in the NBA or when you are an athlete, and that's a world that I lived in. When you are an athlete, you have to. It is. What you have to do, what you have to be able to do from a mental standpoint, and this is going behind the curtain a little bit, what you have to be able to do and have to be able to assess, what you have to be able to ascertain, all of those things. It's amazing what you have to be able to do. You have to, and this is what the world that Scottie Pippen lived in. You have to, and he was amazing at doing this. He could shapeshift when the organization, when the team needed him to be a primary player and needed him to be the focal point, he could do that. But when they also needed him to play a role, a support role to Michael Jordan, he could do that. Now that speaks to two things. That speaks to being versatile enough from a skill standpoint to be able to play that role. And it's almost like being a Band-Aid. Whatever the team needs, I can do that. Well, you have to be versatile enough to do that. That's the first thing. And the second thing you have to do is mentally, you have to be able to assess and be able to tell what the team needs. And you have to sometimes take your ego and put it in your back pocket. And sometimes there may be a player that you may be having a better game than. There may be a player that you may be altogether better than. But for the betterment of the team and for the best interest of the team, you may have to take a back seat. And that completely flies in the face of what you have to do if you want to be part of that 470 to be in the NBA. You have to be uber competitive. You have to be uber competitive because I can tell you this, NBA players and being an athlete and playing at that level, I can tell you, being an athlete is like swimming in shark infested waters. Sharks get credit for being the biggest and baddest things in the water. But in reality, what they're doing is the reason why they eat baby seals. Sorry, Peter. The reason why they eat baby seals is because they're looking for the easiest meal. So they're looking for the weakest link. So when you walk into an NBA locker room and say Michael Jordan's on your team, there has to be a level of humility because you're not eating first. He's eating first. You have to understand that. But then on the other side of that, you better be confident enough where you're not going to let him buffalo you into not being a basketball player too. So you better walk that line. That's one of the things why when the late, great Kobe Bryant always says that my favorite player was Derek Fisher, because it was two things. Derek Fisher was tough. Derek Fisher never got in the way of whatever Kobe was doing. But Derek Fisher also didn't allow Kobe to buffalo him into not being a basketball player. When Derek Fisher had an open shot, Derek Fisher took it. Even when Kobe was trying to hunt down a shot and hunting down the ball and asking for the ball, Derek Fisher took his open shot. And that, when you play a team sport, that's what you need, because ultimately the ultimate level of team success is when everybody gets to participate. So sometimes when you have a personality like an MJ or a personality like a Kobe, you have to make sure that, yeah, okay, it's your show, but you're not going to punk me into not being a contributor as well. No question, Dory, Pippen is the man. There's no question about that. And I'm glad that Mike even said that. And he said, there's no winning championships. There's no Michael Jordan. There's no 6-time champion, 6-time finals MVP without Pippen. Go back, Hoop family, a little bit of a history lesson. I can tell you this from being in Southern California. When the Bulls won their first title in 1991, they lost game one because Michael, being uber competitive, took on the challenge of guarding Magic Johnson, and they lost game one. And then they were on the verge of actually losing game two as well. And at a juncture during that game, the biggest adjustment in that series was the Bulls took their Swiss Army knife. They took their guy that is their Band-Aid, and they took Scottie Pippen and they put him on Magic Johnson. A little bit bigger, a little bit stronger than Michael. And that changed the whole series. And when you look at that, changed the whole series, and the Bulls ultimately won that series. And when you look at that success that Michael had, again, oftentimes Scottie Pippen was guarding the best perimeter player on that team. Sometimes he was versatile enough where he could guard fours. When they would play the Utah Jazz in the finals, sometimes Scottie Pippen would be on the great Karl Malone. The other thing that Scottie did is he took the facilitating, and I can say this as a point guard, it's a huge load and it's a huge ask on a player to constantly always doing the facilitating. And when you are the one that's always responsible for that takes a lot, especially when the opposing teams know that. They actually commit a lot of they take a lot of their resources and commit those to stopping you. And actually, Scottie took that responsibility from Mike. And there are times when Mike was versatile enough with his basketball IQ where he could bring the ball up the floor and facilitate. He did all of those things. But Scottie Pippen served as that's why the Bulls never had a quote unquote traditional point guard that set the table and do all those things, because Scottie Pippen did that. And yeah, going into talking about those Lakers, yeah, Robert Ory the same way, just knowing that's part of being successful, hoop fam, when you are trying to make the NBA. In fact, when I was scouting, I always looked at players that actually I would look at their best skill set and say, okay, whatever your best skill set is, shout out Emilio Sparks for joining, appreciate you. So whatever their best skill set is, whatever they do best, I would ask myself, can they do that at an NBA level? If the answer is yes, then it's okay. That's a player that we should have on our team. And oftentimes organizations spend so much time actually looking at players and concentrating on what they aren't that they miss what they are. And so I look at it as, okay, if this player can be a star as a rebounder, if this player can be a star as a defensive player, then let's have them on our team. And if they add more to their game, then hey, we're playing with house money. That's awesome. But if they don't, I know that they can do these things at an NBA level. And the things that they can't do, we'll bring other people on our team and allow them to do that. So Scotty was the ultimate Swiss Army knife that could do everything, and he could do everything at a high level. And I talked about this in my Hall of Fame series when I was talking about Kevin Garnett. And he's one of the few players in NBA history that led his team in scoring, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks. And Scottie Pippen also did that. And he did it the year that Michael retired. And it was Akeem Olajuwon won the MVP, but there are a lot of people that felt like Scottie Pippen should have won the MVP that year. And the Bulls were within what people say, a phantom call from going back to the Eastern Conference Finals without Michael Jordan when Scottie Pippen contested a Hubert Davis shot when he was playing for the Knicks. And it may not have been a foul. It may have been a foul. I'll leave that for you all, hoop fan, to really kind of think about that and talk about that if you think that's a foul or not. But, it really, when you come to the league, yep, that's right, Lawrence, versatility and humility, no question. Appreciate you joining. Hope your family is doing well. Many blessings to you, sir. So, yeah, when you look at how you have to be wired when you walk into a locker room, and even when you may be the most talented and most versatile player on the team, and you walk in there and now it's the proving grounds and you have to pay your dues, earn your stripes, as MJ said. When you have to do that, it takes a shift in mentality. And you're going from a situation where you are the biggest fish, in case of MJ at UNC, the biggest fish in a big pond, and now you're going to an ocean and you have to prove who you are. And part of that is paying your dues and being humble, but part of it is also knowing who you are and walking in your purpose, hoop fam, as well. So that's another thing that you really have to be cognizant of. And oftentimes that's the balance. That's the reason why most NBA players that don't make it, that's the reason why they don't make it. It's almost never about talent, because once you get to that stage, everybody's talented. It's the same way when you're a college athlete. Once you get there, everybody's talented. So now you have to master that humility of, hey, I haven't proved anything at this level, but I'm also confident to know I'm that dude too. So that is major. You have to be able to walk that line, and that's a difficult line to walk for sure. That's a difficult line. Very difficult. Steven, appreciate you joining, man. I appreciate it. Yes, sir. Lawrence, I'm trying, family. I'm trying, brother. Trying to make sure that the hoop fam and my sports fam understands how much I love this stuff and pass on some of the things that I've learned. I definitely want to do that. No question. So, it's just really amazing how this is all coming together. I'm sure that I have a lot of things that we're going to discuss as this documentary continues to progress. So does anybody have any questions? I want to take some questions. I feel like I've been talking a lot. I know I've been talking a lot. I appreciate it. I appreciate you all. Appreciate you all for joining. Appreciate you all for giving me some questions, giving me some things to talk about. I have many more things to talk about, from my experience as a player, how this all relates to me, how it relates from a branding perspective, the impact on the world, all of those different things. So, bunch of stuff to say. Proud history. Appreciate you, Uncle. Love you. All right, Hoop fam, I appreciate you. I will see you all soon. Thank you for joining me. You all stay healthy, stay safe, stay blessed. Love you all.